Gemini. The Gray Spectrum Between Good and Evil. https://g.co/gemini-share-c37245972986透过 2.5 Flash 建立2025年9月29日下午12点39分。发布时间2025年9月29日下午12点41分。请提供英文文章 Between Good and Evil. That's a profound topic. Here is an original essay exploring the complex space between good and evil. The Gray Spectrum Between Good and Evil. The human experience has long been framed by the stark dichotomy of good and evil. From ancient mythology to modern cinema, we are constantly presented with clear heroes and villains, a comforting narrative that suggests a clean, immutable line dividing moral light from shadow. Yet, when we turn this lens upon reality, the sharp line dissolves into a vast, unsettling gray spectrum. The truth is that the most fascinating and challenging aspects of human nature reside not at the poles, but in the complicated, ambiguous territory between good and evil. The illusion of purity. Our desire to categorize people as wholly good or evil stems from a basic need for order and safety. We want to believe that acts of cruelty or malice are committed by a distinct other, a monster whose motives are fundamentally alien to our own. This belief in moral purity, however, is a dangerous illusion. History is littered with examples of atrocities committed by individuals who considered themselves righteous, acting in service of what they believed to be a greater good. They were not two-dimensional villains, but complex people whose values were perverted, whose empathy was suppressed, or whose judgment was clouded by fear, dogma, or circumstance. Conversely, those we label as good are seldom flawless. The most heroic acts are often preceded by moments of doubt, selfishness, or moral compromise. A compassionate person might still harbor petty jealousies. A philanthropist might run a business that exploits workers. This suggests that good and evil are not inherent, fixed identities, but rather actions and outcomes that arise from a volatile mix of character, environment, and choice. The power of context. What truly complicates the moral landscape is the overwhelming power of context. A single action can be judged as good or evil depending on the time, culture, and circumstance in which it occurs. A warrior who kills an enemy soldier in battle is hailed as a hero. A person who kills a civilian in a moment of passion is branded a murderer. The intent and the consequence are what define the morality of the act, not the inherent nature of the individual performing it. Furthermore, social psychology has shown how easily ordinary people can be led down darker paths. Experiments demonstrate that when an individual is given authority or placed in a dehumanizing system, the psychological barriers against cruelty crumble. This doesn't excuse the evil, but it forces us to acknowledge a disturbing truth. The potential for darkness is not isolated to a few corrupted souls. It is a universal human vulnerability that social structures can either mitigate or exploit. The line between good and evil, as the psychologist Felix Zimbardo famously noted, is not between people, but one that runs through every human heart. Embracing ambiguity, accepting the gray is essential for moral growth. By rejecting the easy labels of pure good and pure evil, we gain a more accurate, albeit uncomfortable, understanding of ourselves and the world. This ambiguity demands constant moral vigilance. We cannot rely on a fixed, internal goodness to protect us. Instead, we must actively, daily, choose to exercise empathy, confront our biases, and hold ourselves accountable for the consequences of our actions. To live in the space between good and evil is to recognize that we are all capable of both, and that our moral life is a dynamic struggle, not a destination. The truest form of goodness may not be a flawless state of being, but a continuous, imperfect, and hard-fought journey away from the evil that lies perpetually within reach. Do you have any specific examples from literature, history, or current events that you think best illustrate this complex gray area? Google 隐私权政策在新视窗中开启。Google 服务条款在新视窗中开启。个人隐私权与 Gemini 应用程式在新视窗中开启。Gemini 可能会提供不准确的资讯，包括人物资讯，因此请查证回复内容。